So I'll say the same things about this run that I said about the bounty hunter run, which is it'll look rather strong until suddenly suddenly it isn't. How do I say this? Hey, good morning, Mr. Time Out. How you doing, buddy? So it has a ton of offensive power. There's no question it has a ton of offensive power, and I'll go over the build now. But on the back foot, it is quite hard to get stuff done. Maybe less so than Bounty Hunter, right? So maybe it's a little better on the back foot than Bounty Hunter. But that ultimate, for example, the ultimate is so cumbersome. The wind-up time is long. The backswing is long too, right? So it takes a while to wind up and throw, and then you can't do anything for a while afterwards. Every time you go to right-click, you got a amount of time before you can switch again. So if let's say there's a couple things here, and there's a Storm Vermin over here, and you stun them, he can still hit you no problem, right? So there is a lot of weaknesses in the build, but there's a ton of killing power. But you have almost no toughness, right? You have 120 HP and no defensive talents. No get out of jail free ultimate, no damage reduction. So this character goes down like paper, right? You saw that. I got a little bit overwhelmed by 2 Maulers and a Chaos Warrior, and that was it. That was the end. You have to be dominant the whole game. You have to be asserting yourself the whole game. You have to be sniping everything, and you have to be using dodge to make it so you have space to get off vents. So what are a lot of the little moves that I've been doing? A lot of Vermin type 1 moves. So if you want to kill a horde out here, they will spread around you, and you will not get much value. You retreat to a choke. You let them kind of into the choke. You push them back out of the choke, getting a lot of value, and then you dodge while venting back out. If your hotkeys are such that you can't dodge in any direction while venting, you need to rethink your hotkeys if you want to play Sienna at the highest level. What else was I doing? I'm not really experienced with Wiggle, right? But the Wiggle was very strong because the ultimate was making up for 2 of the big weaknesses of this build, which are Shield Vermin. Shield Vermin's not a huge weakness. It's actually pretty good. Beam's actually pretty good against Shield Vermin, but it's a weakness in the sense that it's one of the hard things to kill. It does your primary. It's like your only way of really killing Chaos Warriors. So being able to get up ult frequently is good. If it weren't for Chaos Warriors, if it weren't for Super Armor, I would actually not run cooldown reduction. I think I would just run Heat Sink. What else did I notice that was pretty powerful? So ult boss like Ogre or Chaos Spawn plus Horde normally is horrible. But I noticed something I should have thought of before. It's pretty obvious. Swinging to do a little stun on the Horde and to get your ult up, so wiggling, to get your ult up quickly, means that you can have chain stun on the boss. And I bet you if you're very proficient with it, you can actually pretty much perma-stun the boss while holding the Horde in abeyance. So the skill cap of this build, which you can pull off at the highest level, is pretty insane. It's also very powerful at lower levels of proficiency. One thing I hear about a lot is Wigglemancers using left click on hordes when they're way away from your team, barely doing any damage, and chaining it into ultimate. Ultimate was nerfed last patch, such that it's not as good against hordes anymore. That's not very efficient for you, and it makes your team incapable of doing their job. That's one. And two is the other thing is they'll wiggle even when there's a teammate there, and every time you hit them, you get this annoying friendly fire effect. They get aim punched, so they can't shoot any specials. It's just frustrating. So if you're playing this build in a pub, don't do those things. Don't do those things. Alright, let's go on to how the build's set up. I have no guarantees that this is exactly correct. This just seems like a no-brainer to me. When you're playing normal games of the Grim, this is almost certainly better than these things. These things I don't think matter at all. Quickening and Ashen Form, so it dissipates the no-brainer pick. Extra crit means extra ultimates, so this is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer. Now, some people, there is some negotiation here, but as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're running cooldown reduction on crit, there's no negotiation here either. So, to my opinion, this build is completely fixed. There's no actual choices here. This is only here because this is useless when I'm playing this. This should be this. So there's maybe there's a choice here, and maybe there's a way to argue there's choices here, but I really don't think so. It's nice to know that with this, though, you can get to 100% block cost reduction for a while. So maybe it's possible to argue for Shield of Tarnus, but you'd be giving up a lot of power. So I think it's probably unlikely. So why do I have Sword 1? Hundreds of hours of Vermintide 1 Sword experience versus nearly nil of Vermintide 2 Dagger and Vermintide 2 Mace experience. It just feels comfortable. 2, I just like the push, the level of push it has, and the speed of the push is nice, right? It's enough pushing oomph that you can get out of sticky situations, and that's really all I use it for. It's just a push stick. The crit can easily go. You can actually crit on push, so I have it here. I like block cost reduction stacking here and here as a backup to parry, and parry is the most important trait in this whole build. It's even more important than Resourceful Combatant. Parry is what lets you survive when you get a Storm Vermin up front and you can't kill it, so you can just quick switch block for 1 second. And Gohas has that great mod, Parry Indicator, that lets you see how long parry lasts. It's pretty considerable. Pretty considerable. That window's pretty generous. What else? Stacking crit here and here to go along with the trait Resourceful Sharpshooter, and that lets you get cooldown reduction, a lot of cooldown reduction. It's not actually 2%, it's actually 2 seconds. This is actually, there's a tooltip error here. It doesn't reduce your cooldown by 2%, it reduces it by 2 seconds. So the shorter your cooldown is, the more resourceful matters. And the Pyro's pretty short, so you get it up pretty quickly. The other thing that's happening is every time, if you go to hit one enemy, the tick rate is maximum, right? The tick rate per enemy increases. But when you wiggle, you keep hitting new enemies, so every time you go over them, you get another tick. And that's how you get your ult up so quickly, and you do a little stun on hordes. It's quite a nice synergy. It's probably too strong. I've recommended before a maximum internal a cooldown, like a hidden cooldown on Resourceful Sharpshooter, so it can't proc a million times with a quick wiggle. So what would happen instead is when you wiggle, you get the maximum cooldown, a maximum tick rate of Resourceful, but you wouldn't get like an insane tick rate. I've advocated this before. Okay, so I have 10% power here, 10% power here, 10% Skaven here. I don't know what the exact numbers need to be. It doesn't look like it says 10 and 10, but it really is 10 and 10 because I'm in mod land, and in mod land you get to use max property rolls. So everything counts as 10% no matter what it says on its face value. Why do I have this huge stack? So you get 30% is enough so you can double tap Storm Vermin in the body, because unfortunately with the way headshot modifiers work with beam, even if you have stacked 10%, 10%, 10%, so 30% plus extra damage versus armor Skaven, you still can't headshot them. You still can't headshot them. And headshotting Storm Vermin under pressure when there's many of them, it's just a huge thing. Like if I could stack up to headshot number as opposed to double body shot, I'd work on headshotting them more, but the headshot multiplier for this weapon is not very generous at all. So I don't. What else? Is there anything else worth talking about? The only other property I have is move speed. And move speed is just a little help for any time you're doing a ranged character to help you keep pace. So, anyways, to reiterate how you're playing the build, you have to be as dominant as possible. You have to slay, 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 and slay some more, because if you ever get utterly overwhelmed and on the back foot, it is a very scary thing, as you saw multiple times during that build. I don't consider myself an expert on this build at all. I consider myself an expert on Vermintide 1 Beam, and to a smaller degree, Vermintide 2 Beam with Heatsink. The Resourceful, this is the first time I'm really using it today, a little bit yesterday, and like maybe a game or two here or there in the last month or two. So I still have a lot to learn, but I do like that it enables me to use Sword, which I like using, not have to use Mace for spam, so I can get my ult up more often for Chaos Warrior. I think it's a really fun to build, to play for solo. It's extremely intense for solo. I will say this in passing, as I've said before multiple times lately, the glass cannons, the range head-centric glass cannons, 1, 2, 3, and to a lesser extent 4, and to an even lesser extent 5, so it's really 1, 2, 3, are all extremely powerful on the front foot, right? When they're leaning in and they're throwing punches, they're killing stuff. They compete very well for kills against your teammates because they have a lot of damage and they have a lot of range, which means they can kill stuff before you can get to it. That in and of itself does not mean they're OP. It's kind of annoying sometimes to play with them. I hate playing with a good Beam Pyromancer on your team in an ordinary Legend game when they're very good and you're also a good player. First of all, if you have 2 good players on your team, like experienced good players on your team that also have a little bit of coordination, your full book win rate in Vermintide 2 should be insanely high, right? Like, this game is not... Now that we've gotten good at this game, it's really not harder than Cataclysm on Vermintide 1, right? So it really only takes 1.5 good players to really own. And second of all, it's kind of annoying to play with these guys, because when you're doing all the easy stuff, when you're just running through ambience, running through hordes, these guys are getting all the kills. And getting kills, hitting enemies, that's fun. Everybody wants to hit enemies. That's why you have the issue of everybody trying to shoot the special, everybody running at the horde, everybody trying to kill the Chaos Warrior, right? Like, killing the enemies is fun. And it's kind of irritating to play with the glass cannon, but that doesn't, like, the same thing as saying it's broken, because what these guys lack is what I call clutchability. In a really tight situation, these guys can't do their thing very well. They are doing well when the situation is going well. I know I'm repeating myself from yesterday, but it bears repeating, plus this will go on the YouTubes. So who has insane clutchability? Handmaiden. Followed somewhat by... Anyway, Invis is insane clutchability. Invis is insane. To a lesser degree, this guy, because he doesn't have maneuverability. Movement skills are insane clutchability. 1, 2, 3. To a lesser extent, 4. To a much lesser extent, 5. AoEs that give you an oh shit panic button are very powerful. Clutch. 1. To a much lesser extent, 2. Much lesser extent. High clutch on his ult, but the cooldown's very long, and same here. And then this girl's got insane clutch ability. She's got movement, she's got stun, she can start a revive and teleport away. Like, these guys, there's a lot of characters that have a ton of clutch ability. That's one really important dynamic, and another important dynamic is toughness. You know, it's some general ability to be able to survive. I should say survivability, some general notion of how to survive. That's a product of HP, damage reduction, maneuverability, and a couple other odds and ends. And these guys are at the very, very, very low end of toughness as well, or of survivability as well. So, like, yes, it's a meme to complain about them, etc. I understand 100% where you're coming from. But in terms of balance, it's not quite the same thing. I do think Resourceful Combatant Wiggle needs a bit of a nerf, and I've already discussed that. Anyways, I'm going to stop babbling about the build. Are there any questions or thoughts anyone wants to get in? Cute Ghost says, playing Slayer when they're playing Bounty Hunter, Pyro, Huntsman is pretty meh. Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. It's irritating, you know? Because you don't get to hit any of the enemies, and hitting enemies is fun. It's hard to stay focused when you're just along for the ride. So, you can actually say that these glass cannons may be bad for the game design, while also not saying at the same time that they're, quote, overpowered. Those things are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. I'll also tell you that the upper-end players, you'll see a huge number of them using 2, 3 high clutchability, high survivability characters per run, and maybe 1 and at most 2 glass cannons, right? Not 4, not 3, not 4. And that should tell you something, too, about how important clutchability is. The best class to support this? I don't know about best, but any character that's going to play up next to you has good anti-special and good control is going to be helpful. So, for example, a Foot Knight or a Merc with handgun halberd is going to be helpful. A Slayer that doesn't play too stupid aggro would be helpful, but good luck with that. Really, I mean, most Slayers you see, they kind of put themselves out of position the whole game, rather than play positionally. A one-handed hammer, handgun. This guy, there's a lot of these guys are just really good things to have in the party. They're anchors. They're anchors to your party. They hold positions. They make space for people. They control when things get nuts. Zealot's another good example. Depending on how you play Unchained, that can be helpful as well. Slayer is probably the best at that, except for he has to give up handgun. It's not his kit. His kit doesn't make him not good at it. His kit makes him very good at it. It's just the play style people tend to have with it tends to make him not very good as a partner. Which is more about decision making than mechanics. Slayer is extremely strong. The only reason you don't see him played all the time, again, even more than he is he doesn't compete extremely well for kills when things are going well. When things are going well, if you don't have a ranged glass cannon, it's kind of hard to compete for kills. By the way, can I just tell you something? If the worry people are having is that they're not having fun because they're having a hard time competing for kills, which should sound a lot like Diablo or Path of Exile to you, for Christ's sake, then the real problem is the game is not hard enough. That's what the real problem is. The real problem is the game isn't hard enough for the party that you have, or your party's not coordinated enough. Like, people are really good, but they're not coordinating enough, and the game's not forcing them to. Which, again, is a problem of difficulty not being up to snuff. So the balance of skill and such, the balance of the capabilities of the different careers is too high versus Legend, or Legend's undertuned, or they need another difficulty, or what I actually think really needs to happen is this is inevitable, this is going to happen again and again, that the player base rises to the challenge, and then the next challenge needs to come up, or people are going to get bored, people are going to get frustrated, people are going to get ragey. And that's nobody's fault. I don't blame your teammates. That's Fat Shark's fault, you know? It's like if any of you who are really Legend proficient went and grabbed Pyromancer and went back to Champion, it would be stupid. It'd be stupid. You'd just be walking through everything until suddenly you die. But you'd be half brain dead by then from not paying attention. There's not even enough meat on those bones to keep you paying attention. It's like running greater rifts in Diablo 3. You know, you're just blasting through things. Or rifts, normal rifts, not griffs. Okay. Any other problem? Any other questions? Alright, I'll stop the recording.